She had never been the type to put herself first. Life for her was all about her son, his needs, his education, his happiness. After her divorce, the world had changed in ways she hadn't expected. Raising a young child as a single mother had its challenges, but she'd made it work. She worked long hours at a small office job, and when she wasn't working, she was at home, doing her best to be both a mother and a father to her son. Her life had become a routine. Wake up, get her son ready for school, go to work, pick him up, prepare dinner, help with homework, and finally, when the house was quiet, she'd sit alone in the living room, her only company the soft hum of the television. She had little time for herself, and even less time to think about anything beyond the day-to-day struggles of her life. So when her friend had mentioned the idea of a blind date, she had laughed it off at first. The thought of dating again seemed like a distant dream, but as time passed, the idea began to linger in her mind. She was still young, after all. She wasn't ready to completely give up on the idea of companionship, though she knew it was a complicated thought. Her friend, who had a habit of matchmaking, didn't give up. She kept pushing the idea, until one day she had convinced her to give it a try. Just one date, her friend had said. You never know who you might meet. But there was one condition she couldn't ignore. She would have to bring her son along. Her son, full of energy and curiosity, could not be left with a sitter. It was always a challenge finding someone who could understand her need to balance both worlds, her life as a mother, and her desire to have something more. The day of the date arrived, and her nerves were at an all-time high. She'd spent hours trying to figure out what to wear, knowing that she had little in her wardrobe that was date-worthy. But eventually, she settled on something simple, an outfit that made her feel comfortable but still put together. She wasn't looking to impress anyone. The goal was just to survive the evening and enjoy a night out for once. Her son, as usual, was a bundle of excitement. He couldn't wait to go to the restaurant. She hoped his energy would settle down once they arrived, but deep down she knew it might not. She sighed and grabbed her son's hand as they made their way out the door, reminding him to behave. "You're going to be good, right?" she asked, adjusting his coat. He nodded with a smile, but she could tell his mind was already elsewhere, probably imagining all the things he'd want to do when they got to the restaurant. When they arrived, she immediately felt out of place. The restaurant was elegant with soft lighting and waiters dressed in crisp uniforms. It was the kind of place that made her feel like she was part of a world she didn't belong to. She wasn't used to this kind of atmosphere, but her friend had insisted this was where the man wanted to meet. As they stepped inside, her son's eyes lit up at the sight of the sparkling chandeliers and the polished floors. He looked up at her, excitement written all over his face. She gave him a reassuring smile, though she was anxious about what the evening might hold. They were shown to a table in the corner, and she felt her palms begin to sweat. She reminded herself that it was just one date and she had to at least give it a shot. She had nothing to lose. As they sat down, she apologized immediately. "I'm really sorry," she said. "I wasn't sure if it would be appropriate to leave him with a sitter tonight. I hope you don't mind." She expected a sigh, a glance of discomfort, maybe even a comment about how he wasn't ready for a woman with a child. But instead, the man across the table simply smiled. His eyes were calm, not a hint of judgment in them. He gave a small chuckle. "It's all right. I have a niece who's about the same age. I know how it goes." The warmth in his voice surprised her. She had been so used to people giving her that look, the one that said, "I don't know if I'm ready for a single mom with a kid." But this man didn't seem bothered at all. If anything, he appeared completely unfazed. Her son, sitting next to her, immediately began asking questions about the menu. She could tell he wasn't shy, but she was still embarrassed. She wasn't sure how the man would feel about a child interrupting the conversation every few minutes. But to her surprise, the man responded to each of her son's questions with patience, answering them in a way that made her son laugh. It was clear that he wasn't the typical guy she had expected. Most men she had met in the past would have been annoyed or frustrated by her son's interruptions. But this man seemed to take it all in stride. As they chatted, she learned that the man was easy to talk to. His voice was calm and he didn't rush the conversation. There was something about him that put her at ease, though she still felt out of place in the fancy restaurant. Her son had stopped asking questions for the moment and was now looking around the room, taking in the sights. The man's demeanor was completely different from what she expected from someone who chose such a high-end place for a first date. He wasn't pretentious or overly polished. He didn't seem to mind the interruptions or the fact that her son was with them. In fact, he seemed genuinely interested in what her son had to say, even if it was just a question about the length of the waiter's tie. She realized then that this wasn't just a typical blind date. There was something different about him, a calmness that made her feel comfortable. She wasn't sure yet if this was the start of something special, but she knew one thing for sure. She didn't feel judged. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. As the evening wore on, she couldn't help but feel grateful. Despite the uncertainty that came with bringing her son to a date, things seemed to be going smoothly. Her son was happy, the man was kind, and for once she felt like she could relax. The world outside didn't seem so intimidating. But even as the night unfolded, she couldn't help but wonder, could this man really be different? Could he be someone who would accept her? Not despite her son, but because of him? She pushed the thought aside and focused on the present. After all, there was no point in overthinking things just yet. As dessert was served, she glanced at the man across from her, who was now talking to her son about a toy he'd noticed earlier in the evening. His patience and genuine interest were evident, and she realized in that moment that this was a rare kind of person, a person who didn't just see a mother, but someone who was worthy of respect. And with that realization, she felt a strange sense of hope. Maybe this night wouldn't be as ordinary as she had feared. The restaurant was beginning to fill up as the evening drew on, and though the soft hum of conversation surrounded them, it felt as though the three of them were in their own little world. Her son, still full of energy, had started to grow restless. He shifted in his chair, looking around the room, his eyes darting from the food to the waiters to the other diners. He was never one to sit still for too long, and the setting wasn't helping. The flickering candles on the table and the sound of clinking glasses only seemed to make him more curious. "Mom," he whispered, tugging at her sleeve. "Can we get dessert?" She smiled, feeling the familiar rush of warmth that came with being his mother. He was her world, her constant companion. And in moments like these, she was reminded that the challenges of raising him were worth it. "Not just yet," she replied softly, her eyes flicking toward the man across the table. The man had been easygoing throughout the meal, but she couldn't help feeling like something was off. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she had this nagging feeling that maybe, just maybe, this was the calm before the storm. What would he say when the bill came? Would he really be okay with the fact that her son had interrupted their conversation more times than she could count? As if reading her thoughts, he smiled again, that same easy, reassuring smile. "He's got a lot of energy, huh?" She chuckled nervously, nodding. "Yeah, he does. Always asking questions, always exploring. I'm sorry if he's been a little much." The man waved it off with a casual gesture. "It's fine. Kids are curious. I can see why you're so dedicated to him. It's not easy raising a child on your own." Her heart warmed a little, but she couldn't help but feel self-conscious. It wasn't often that someone acknowledged the hard work she put into her son's upbringing. She wasn't used to praise, and sometimes she felt that people saw her struggle and judged her for it. But this man, he seemed genuinely understanding. Her son interrupted her thoughts again, this time with a question about the food. "What's that, Mom?" he asked, pointing at the dessert cart that was being wheeled around the room. She glanced at it, then back at him. "That's the dessert cart," she explained. "It's full of sweet treats. Maybe we'll get something later." But the man, noticing her son's curiosity, leaned forward, his voice low and friendly. "Would you like some dessert now?" he asked the boy, his tone soft and inviting. "We can share. How about a slice of that chocolate cake? It looks amazing." Her son's eyes lit up at the suggestion, his earlier restlessness forgotten. He nodded eagerly, and she couldn't help but smile at the excitement on his face. "Chocolate cake, please," he declared, his voice loud enough for the whole room to hear, and for a moment she felt embarrassed, though she didn't show it. She was grateful, though, for the way the man had handled the situation. He wasn't reacting with irritation as most people might. He seemed to genuinely enjoy the boy's enthusiasm. The waiter, who had been standing quietly at the edge of their table, nodded and took their dessert order. Her son continued to chat excitedly about his day, asking random questions, some of them about the man sitting across from them. She listened with one ear, but mostly she watched the man's reactions. How would he respond? Would he grow tired of this child's endless curiosity? But instead of appearing put off, the man seemed to enjoy the exchange. He laughed at her son's jokes and answered his questions with patience and genuine interest. He didn't try to rush the conversation, didn't seem like he was looking for a way to end the evening early. It was the first time in a long time that she didn't feel like an outsider in someone else's world. They continued to talk, and as the evening wore on, she started to feel a sense of ease. Maybe it was the way the man had been so kind, or maybe it was the fact that her son was so comfortable around him. Whatever it was, she found herself relaxing more and more. She had always prided herself on being strong, on being able to juggle the demands of motherhood and her own needs. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't alone in this. She didn't have to carry the weight of everything by herself. For a few hours at least, it felt like there was someone who understood. Her son, now calm after the promise of dessert, continued his quiet observations of the restaurant around them. She took this moment to glance at the man across the table, studying him a little more closely. He was dressed in a crisp suit, his hair neatly styled, his posture perfect. He looked like someone who had it all together, someone who could probably afford to eat at places like this every night if he wanted to. Yet, despite his polished appearance, there was an openness to him that she hadn't expected. He didn't seem like the type of person who was constantly worried about appearances, constantly trying to prove something. He seemed comfortable, and that was something she hadn't realized she needed in a person, until now. When the waiter brought the chocolate cake, her son's excitement was palpable. He reached for the fork almost immediately, his face lighting up as he took his first bite. She couldn't help but laugh at how much joy a simple dessert could bring him. The man smiled at the sight, clearly enjoying the moment too. They ate in silence for a while, the air between them now comfortable and easy. Her son was savoring his cake, and she could see the man across the table stealing glances at her. For a brief second, she wondered what he was thinking. Was he just being kind, or was he genuinely interested in her? It wasn't just her son that had caught his attention. She realized now that she had been so focused on her son's behavior that she hadn't fully paid attention to the man's subtle glances toward her. It wasn't anything overt, but there was an unmistakable warmth in his eyes. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe it was the gentle way he had treated her son. Maybe it was the way he listened intently when she spoke. She didn't know, but there was something about this man that made her feel seen. In all the years she had been a mother, she had often felt invisible. Her world had revolved around her son, and while that was never a burden, there was always the feeling that she had been left out of the equation. Tonight, that wasn't the case. Tonight, she felt like she mattered too. As the evening continued, she allowed herself to relax a little more. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and her son's giggles and questions seemed to create a lightness in the air. She had never expected a blind date to be like this. She had thought it would be awkward, forced, yet here she was, smiling, laughing, feeling more comfortable than she had in a long time. By the time the dessert plates were cleared, her son was content, his energy finally spent. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes half closed in the bliss of a full stomach. She glanced at the man once more, wondering if he would be eager to leave now that the meal was over. She expected him to check his watch or mention something about getting to bed early, but instead he simply sat back and smiled at her. "This has been a great evening," he said, his voice calm and steady. She blinked, surprised by his words. She hadn't expected him to say anything like that. "I'm glad you think so," she replied, feeling a little flustered. "I wasn't sure how the night would go, but I'm happy we came." Her son yawned loudly, and she could see the man's eyes soften as he looked at the boy. "He's a great kid," he said. The words warmed her heart. It was rare for someone to notice the little things about her son, to see past the noise and the mess and acknowledge him for who he was. For the first time that night, she felt like this date, this simple, unexpected evening had been more than just about her. It had been about connection, about seeing and being seen. And as they stood up to leave, she couldn't help but feel that in that moment something had shifted. The night had taken an unexpected turn. What had started as an uncomfortable blind date had become something far more meaningful than she could have imagined. She had gone into it expecting awkward silences, forced conversations, and a lot of self-consciousness. Instead, she had found herself in a place where she felt understood, where her son was welcomed, and where, for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was being seen as more than just a mother. As they left the restaurant, her son, now a little drowsy from the evening's excitement, clung to her side, his hand gripping hers tightly. She didn't mind. In fact, she was grateful for the closeness. It was moments like these that reminded her why she worked so hard, why she sacrificed so much. Her son was her world, and there was nothing she wouldn't do for him. The man walked beside them, his pace slow and steady, as if he had nowhere else to be but right here with them. She glanced at him, wondering what was going through his mind. He was still calm, still composed, but there was a warmth in his eyes that had not gone unnoticed. "Thank you for this evening," she said, breaking the silence. "It's been a while since I've had a night out like this. I didn't expect to enjoy myself so much." He smiled, the kind of smile that made her feel at ease. "I'm glad you did. It's nice to see someone who's not afraid to be themselves, especially with everything you've got going on." Her heart skipped a beat. The words seemed to speak directly to the core of her. She had always been afraid of being judged for her choices, for her life as a single mother. But here, with him, there was no judgment, only acceptance. Her son yawned again, rubbing his eyes as they reached the car. "Can we go home now, Mom?" he asked, his voice small and sleepy. "Of course," she replied, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "We're almost there." The man held the door open for them, a small gesture that made her feel even more at ease. She was used to doing everything herself, used to carrying the weight of her responsibilities without expecting help. But here, with him, there was no need to carry that burden alone. As they drove through the quiet streets, she found herself lost in thought. Could this be something more than just a one-time meeting? Could this man, this stranger, be someone who understood the challenges of raising a child on her own? She wasn't sure, but there was a part of her that wanted to believe it. When they reached her apartment complex, her son was nearly asleep in the back seat. She turned to the man who had been quiet for most of the ride. "Thank you again," she said, her voice sincere. "I really appreciate everything. You've been so kind." He nodded, a soft smile playing at the corners of his lips. "It's nothing. I enjoyed the evening, and I mean it when I say, if you ever need help, don't hesitate to reach out." She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. "I don't know if I would. I don't want to take advantage of you." He shook his head. "It's not about that. It's about offering support when it's needed. If you ever feel like you need anything, you don't have to go through it alone." His words struck a chord with her, more deeply than she expected. For so long, she had shouldered everything by herself. She had raised her son, built her life, and navigated the challenges of single motherhood without asking for help. But here was someone she barely knew, offering that very thing, support without strings attached. It was a rare gift, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to accept it. But the kindness in his voice made her think, made her wonder if it was possible to allow someone else in, even just a little. She nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said quietly. He smiled again, and she felt a sense of peace in that smile. "You're welcome. Take care of yourself and him." With that, he got out of the car, closing the door gently behind him. She watched as he walked away, her mind racing with questions she wasn't sure how to answer. What was this? Was it just a fleeting connection, or was there something more? As she carried her son up to their apartment, she couldn't help but reflect on the night. It had been so different from anything she had expected. The evening had been easy, comfortable even, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the weight of her responsibilities as a mother alone. She had felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. Inside the apartment, she tucked her son into bed, brushing his hair back from his forehead as he drifted off to sleep. She kissed him gently on the cheek and whispered, "Good night, my love." As she turned off the light and closed the door, she felt the quiet of the night settle around her. The apartment was still, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. She sank into the couch, staring out the window, lost in her thoughts. What had just happened? Was it a sign that there was more to her life than just the routine she had built for herself and her son? She didn't have the answers, but she couldn't ignore the sense of hope that had quietly bloomed in her heart. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just a mother. She was a woman, a person who could have more than just the role of being someone's caregiver. She could have dreams, desires, and connections that went beyond the needs of her child. But there was also a part of her that wasn't sure if she was ready to let someone else into their world. Her son had been her everything for so long, and the idea of sharing him, of sharing her life with another person, was a difficult one to wrap her head around. Yet, as she sat there, the quiet of the apartment surrounding her, she knew one thing for sure: this man, this stranger, had given her something she hadn't realized she needed. He had shown her that there was still room for hope in her life, that there was still a chance for connection, even in the midst of the chaos she had lived for so long. She didn't know where things would go from here, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that maybe, just maybe, life had more to offer than she had ever imagined. The following days felt like a dream, something she couldn't quite grasp. It was as though the evening she had spent with him had altered something deep inside her. She wasn't sure what it was, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to life than the routine she had been living. Every day had felt the same: work, home, meals, and bedtime, but now, there was a small flicker of possibility in her heart. A quiet thought that maybe, just maybe, things could change. Her son had picked up on her shift in mood, as children often do. He was more attentive than usual, watching her with his bright, curious eyes. At first she thought he was just being his usual playful self, but as the days went by she began to notice something different. He seemed to be more aware of her emotions, more tuned into her mood. One evening, as she was cleaning up after dinner, he walked up to her and tugged on her sleeve. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked, his voice soft, almost as if he had been holding back the question for some time. She paused for a moment, surprised by the question. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. "You just seem different. You smile more. You're not as tired," he said, his big eyes watching her carefully. She chuckled softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I guess I am just feeling a little better lately," she said, though she wasn't sure how to explain it to him. How could she explain a shift she didn't fully understand herself? "I'm glad," he said with a smile, before turning his attention back to his toy car on the table. She watched him for a moment, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and love. She had always put him first, always made sure he was okay even when she wasn't. But now, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was allowed to think about herself, even just a little. She wasn't sure what that meant for her future, but it felt good. The next few days passed in a blur. Her son was doing well at school, and she was managing her job with more ease than she had before. But every so often, her thoughts drifted back to that evening, to the man who had been kind, understanding, and patient, not just with her, but with her son, too. His words echoed in her mind. "If you ever need help, don't hesitate to reach out." She hadn't fully realized it at the time, but those words had struck her in a way that left her feeling both hopeful and vulnerable. What did he mean by that? Was he offering more than just a friendly gesture? Was he genuinely interested in being part of her life, or was he just being polite? She couldn't tell. And yet, despite her uncertainty, a small part of her wanted to reach out, wanted to see where this could go. But there was a problem. She had spent so much of her life protecting her son from the outside world, from anything that could disrupt their small, carefully constructed bubble. The idea of bringing someone new into their lives felt both exciting and terrifying. Could she really let go of the fear that had held her back for so long? That evening, as she sat on the couch after putting her son to bed, she found herself staring at her phone, her finger hovering over his number. She had saved it the night they met, but she hadn't yet called or messaged him. It felt like a big step, like stepping out of the small, safe world she had created for herself and her son. Her heart beat faster as she debated what to do. What if he wasn't interested? What if he had simply been polite, being kind because it was the right thing to do? What if he was just looking for a one-time connection, a casual evening out, and had no intention of continuing anything further? But what if he did want more? What if he genuinely cared? What if he had been waiting for her to reach out? She let out a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on her. The thought of it made her palms sweat. But as she looked at the phone in her hand, she realized that she had to take a leap. For once, she had to put herself out there, to take the risk and see where it led. After all, she couldn't stay in the same place forever. If she wanted something different, she had to be willing to make the first move. With a steadying breath, she tapped the number and typed a simple message. "Hey, I've been thinking about our evening together. I'd love to talk more sometime if you're interested." She stared at the screen for a moment, second-guessing herself. Was it too forward? Too casual? Before she could think too much about it, she hit send. For a long time, she sat there staring at her phone, willing it to ring. The silence felt deafening. She told herself it was silly to expect an immediate response. After all, it had only been a few days and he might be busy. But the anticipation was enough to make her stomach flutter, and her mind raced with all the what-ifs. Just as she was about to convince herself that maybe she had made a mistake, the phone buzzed in her hand. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw his name on the screen. She opened the message quickly, her fingers trembling slightly. "I'm glad to hear from you. I've been thinking about you too. How about we grab coffee sometime this weekend?" Her breath caught in her throat. He had replied. He was interested. The excitement that rushed through her was overwhelming, but mixed with it was a sense of disbelief. Could this really be happening? Could she really be starting something new? She smiled to herself, her nerves easing. She quickly typed a response. "Coffee sounds great. I'd love to." As she hit send, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had taken the first step, and now it was up to where things would go from here. The uncertainty was still there, but the weight of fear that had held her back was gone, replaced by a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in a long time. The next few days flew by in a blur of excitement. She found herself looking forward to the weekend more than anything else. It wasn't just about the coffee. It was about the possibility of something new, something that wasn't just about being a mother or a worker, but about being herself, about finding a connection with someone who could see her for who she was, not just the role she played in life. When the weekend arrived, she got ready in front of the mirror, carefully choosing an outfit that felt comfortable but still made her feel confident. She was nervous, of course. She didn't know what to expect, but there was also a sense of excitement bubbling inside her. This was a chance to explore something beyond the everyday routine. It was a chance to find something new, and perhaps to find herself again. As she drove to the cafe, her thoughts drifted to her son. He had asked her if she was going to see the man again, and she had simply smiled and nodded. She hadn't yet told him everything, hadn't yet explained what this all meant, but he seemed happy for her, as though he could sense that something was different. When she arrived at the cafe, she saw him right away, sitting at a table by the window, looking just as calm and composed as the last time she had seen him. But there was something different in his expression now. It wasn't just the polite smile of someone who was being courteous. It was the smile of someone who genuinely wanted to be there, who was genuinely happy to see her. As she walked over, he stood up and greeted her with a warm smile. "I'm glad you could make it," he said, his voice soft but full of sincerity. "I'm glad too," she replied, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease. For the first time in days, she felt like she could truly relax. They sat down and began to talk, the conversation flowing easily between them. And as they spoke, she realized something she hadn't expected. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just thinking about her son, about her job, or about the next task she had to do. She was just thinking about this moment, about the connection they were building and about the possibility of something more. The weeks that followed were a blur of new experiences and unexpected moments. It was as though in the blink of an eye everything had shifted. What had started as a casual, somewhat nervous blind date had blossomed into something real, something deep and meaningful. She wasn't sure when it happened, but somewhere along the way, she realized that this wasn't just a passing connection. It was something more, something worth exploring. They continued to meet regularly, always in places that were quiet and comfortable, where they could talk without distractions. Their conversations flowed easily, and each time they saw each other, it felt like they were peeling back another layer of themselves. She found herself sharing more than she ever expected. Stories from her childhood, the struggles she had faced as a single mother, and even her dreams for the future. He listened intently, never once judging, never once making her feel like she was burdening him with her words. It was rare, this kind of acceptance. It felt almost too good to be true. She had always been careful with her heart, always keeping a safe distance from anything or anyone that might disrupt the careful balance she had built for herself and her son. But there was something about him that made her feel safe, something about him that made her believe it was okay to let her guard down. He wasn't just kind. He was thoughtful, considerate, and, most importantly, patient. One afternoon, as they sat in a small park near her apartment, her son ran around the playground with a group of other children. He was laughing, his energy contagious, and for a moment, She simply watched him, a smile tugging at her lips. The man sitting beside her followed her gaze, and for a moment they sat in silence, watching her son play. "You've done a great job with him," he said softly. His voice filled with admiration. She felt a warmth in her chest at his words. It wasn't often that someone acknowledged how hard she worked to be the best mother she could be. Most people only saw the surface, the mother trying to juggle it all. But rarely did anyone recognize the quiet struggles she faced behind closed doors. "I try," she said, her voice quiet, almost reflective. "Some days are harder than others, but he's worth it." He nodded, his expression serious now. "I can see that. It's not easy being a single parent, but it looks like you're doing just fine." Her heart swelled with gratitude at his kindness. She hadn't expected him to say anything like that, and she wasn't sure why it meant so much. Maybe it was because, for the first time, someone was seeing her for who she really was. Not just a mother, but a person. A person with hopes and dreams and fears. Over the next few weeks, their connection grew. They spent more time together, slowly building a foundation of trust and understanding. It wasn't just about the evenings they spent talking over coffee or dinner. It was the small moments, the way he made her feel heard, the way he was so attentive to her son, the way he respected her boundaries and her pace. But there was still one thing she was hesitant about: introducing him to her son. It had been easy to meet him in casual settings, to talk about their lives and get to know each other, but the idea of blending their worlds was a little more complicated. She had spent so long protecting her son, keeping his world small and safe, that the thought of introducing him to someone new felt like a big step. One evening, as they sat together in her living room after dinner, the topic came up. He was sitting on the couch, his eyes gentle as he watched her. "You know," he said carefully, "I've been thinking about something. I know you've got a lot going on with your son, and I don't want to push you, but would you ever consider introducing me to him?" She felt a knot form in her stomach at the question. It wasn't that she didn't want him to meet her son. It was just that the idea of bringing someone into their lives felt like a huge shift. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I've always been protective of him. I don't want to rush anything, especially when it comes to him." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I get that. I respect it. I just don't want to overstep, but if and when you're ready, I'd like to meet him. He's an important part of your life, and I respect that." His words were gentle, and she could hear the sincerity in his voice. It made her feel safe, made her feel like she wasn't being rushed into anything, but it also made her realize something she hadn't fully acknowledged until now. She was starting to care for him, truly care for him, and that meant allowing him into the world she had built for herself and her son. After that conversation, she found herself thinking a lot about the future. She knew she couldn't protect her son from everything forever, and the truth was, if she wanted to explore a relationship with this man, there would come a time when they would have to meet. But that moment had to feel right. It had to be when she was ready, when her son was ready, and when she felt confident in the decision. A few weeks later, the opportunity came when her son invited the man to join them for a Saturday afternoon at the park. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a simple, casual invitation. She wasn't sure how he would react, but when she asked him, he smiled and agreed without hesitation. He had never pushed her into anything before, so this was a sign that he respected her boundaries and was willing to wait for the right moment. When the day came, her heart raced as she watched her son approach him with cautious curiosity. Her son wasn't used to new people in his life, especially when it came to her personal life. But to her surprise, he walked up to the man with a big smile and extended his hand. "Hi, I'm glad you're here." The man bent down to his level, offering his hand in return. "It's nice to meet you." "I've heard a lot about you." Her son beamed, clearly pleased. "I like playing soccer." "Do you know how?" The man's face lit up with genuine interest. "I do. I'd love to play with you sometime." And just like that, the ice was broken. What had once felt like a huge, insurmountable step now felt natural. Watching them interact, watching her son talk to him with such ease made her realize that this was exactly what she had been hoping for. It wasn't just about having someone in her life. It was about building something that could become a real, lasting connection, not just between the two of them, but with her son as well. As the afternoon wore on, she sat on the bench watching them play. Her son was laughing, running around the field, and the man was right there beside him, cheering him on, giving him tips, and most importantly, showing him that he cared. It was a simple moment, But it was a beautiful one. A moment when she realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something truly special. Later that evening, as they all sat down to dinner, her son asked, "Can we have him over again sometime?" His question was simple, but it spoke volumes. The man smiled, looking at her. "I'd love to," he said, "whenever you're ready." And in that moment, she realized that the future was full of possibilities. She had spent so many years focusing on her son, on their little world, that she had almost forgotten what it was like to have a life beyond that. But now, with him, this man who had been patient, kind, and understanding, she felt like she was stepping into a new chapter of her life, one that was no longer defined by fear or doubt. It was a chapter filled with hope, connection, and the possibility of a future she had once only dreamed of. The days that followed were a beautiful mix of small, quiet moments that gradually became more meaningful. She had never imagined that her life could shift so easily, yet here she was, experiencing a kind of peace she hadn't known in years. It wasn't perfect, of course, life was never perfect, but it felt right. Her son had warmed up to the idea of the man being in their lives more than she had expected. Every time they met, he was more comfortable, more trusting. It was as if the man's easygoing nature had slowly won him over, and now, her son saw him not just as an acquaintance, but as a friend. One Saturday afternoon, as she was getting ready to meet the man for a walk in the park, her son came up to her holding a drawing he had made. "Look, Mom," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "I drew a picture of me and Mr. Dan playing soccer. Can I give it to him?" The simple fact that he had called the man Mr. Dan made her heart swell. It was a small gesture, but it signified a lot. Her son had made a connection with him, something she hadn't expected so soon. He wasn't just a figure in the background anymore. He was becoming part of their world. She smiled, her heart warming. "Of course you can. That's a lovely drawing." Her son beamed, and without wasting any time, he carefully folded the picture and tucked it into his pocket, ready to give it to the man when they saw him. As they walked to the park, she couldn't help but feel a bit nervous. It had been a few weeks since their first meeting, and while things had been going well, there was still that small voice in her head wondering if this was all too good to be true. What if it all fell apart? What if she had misread the situation? But then she looked down at her son, who was happily skipping ahead, excited about the day, and she felt a sense of calm. Whatever happened, whatever came next, she knew that she would handle it. And most importantly, she knew that her son would be okay. When they arrived at the park, the man was already there, sitting on a bench watching a group of children play. He stood up when he saw them, a smile spreading across his face. "Hey there," he greeted, his voice warm. Her son, as if on cue, ran up to him, holding out the drawing with both hands. "This is for you," he said proudly. The man knelt down to his level, accepting the drawing with a gentle smile. "Wow, this is amazing," he said, genuinely impressed. "You really know how to make a good picture." Her son grinned, his eyes shining. "It's us playing soccer," he explained, as if the picture itself wasn't obvious enough. The man chuckled and looked up at her, his smile softening. "You're raising a very creative kid," he said, his words full of admiration. She felt a rush of warmth at his praise. It wasn't often that someone acknowledged the effort she put into raising her son, especially in a world that seemed to value success over everything else. But here was someone who saw the heart, who saw the love and care she put into her role as a mother. "I try my best," she said softly, feeling a lump form in her throat. "It's not always easy, but he's worth it." "I can tell," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "You're doing a great job." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment she didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to receiving compliments like that, and it was strange in a good way. It made her realize how much she had been longing for someone to see her. Really see her, and not just for her role as a mother, but as a person. The afternoon passed quickly as they walked around the park talking and laughing. Her son was full of energy, darting around the playground with the other kids while she and the man sat on the bench enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. Every so often he would look over at her, his gaze soft and understanding, and she would find herself smiling back at him without thinking. As they walked home later, her son chatted excitedly about his day, telling her about the games he had played and the new friends he had made. She listened attentively, her mind wandering only briefly to the man beside them, It felt so natural now, this dynamic, her son, and him. It didn't feel forced or awkward. It felt like the beginning of something real. That night, as she tucked her son into bed, she kissed him goodnight and sat for a moment by his side, her hand gently brushing his hair away from his forehead. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, her voice filled with love. He smiled sleepily, his eyes fluttering closed. "Thanks, Mom. I'm glad Mr. Dan liked my picture." She chuckled softly. "He did. He thought it was great." Her son nodded, already drifting off to sleep, and she felt a quiet sense of peace settle over her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like everything was falling into place. There were still challenges ahead, of course, but for now, it was enough to know that she was doing her best, that her son was happy, and that there was someone in her life who genuinely cared. Over the next few weeks, their time together continued to grow. They spent more afternoons at the park, more quiet evenings at home, and each time they met, the connection between them deepened. It was no longer just about the possibility of a relationship. It was about building a partnership, one that was grounded in trust, respect, and understanding. Her son was growing fond of the man, too, often asking if he could join them for outings or even just to hang out. He was starting to see him not just as a friend to his mother, but as someone who could be trusted, someone who was kind and dependable. And the man, for his part, was patient and understanding, never rushing the process, always giving her son the space he needed to adjust. One evening, as they were all sitting in the living room after dinner, her son looked up at the man and asked, "Do you want to play soccer with me tomorrow?" The man smiled, a twinkle in his eye. "Of course. I'd love to." Her son's face lit up with excitement, and for a moment it felt like everything was exactly as it should be. She looked at them, her son full of joy and the man who was becoming a steady presence in their lives, and she realized that this was the family she had been building all along. It wasn't about perfection, and it wasn't about following some blueprint of what a family should look like. It was about connection, love, and mutual respect. That night, as she lay in bed, her thoughts swirled around everything that had happened in the past few months. She had been so focused on protecting herself and her son, on keeping everything small and manageable, that she had never allowed herself to fully embrace the idea of something more. But now with him, this man who had shown her kindness and patience, she felt like she was learning to trust again, to open herself up to the possibility of something bigger than she had ever imagined. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know where this connection would take them, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of it. She wasn't afraid to let go of the past and step into something new. She knew that, whatever happened, she had built something strong, a family built on love, respect, and understanding, and that was all she needed. The next morning, when she watched her son run outside to play soccer with the man, she knew deep down that this was only the beginning. She had found a connection she never expected, and in doing so, she had found something even more valuable: the ability to open her heart again,